Brahmi oil. I still have that gamsha. It turned green from the Brahmi oil from Prabhupada's head, so I still have that at home. Anyway, so Hasadutta was quite keen to get this recording, so Prabhupada agreed. So at about 6 a.m. in the morning, Hasadutta set up some simple recording equipment in Prabhupada's bedroom. His Divine Grace played the harmonium and he recorded Hari Hari Bifale. Harikesh accompanied him on the mridanga and I played the kartals. So again the next morning, September the 14th, due to physical weakness, Prabhupada is not taking his morning walks at present. He did, however, record another bhajan with Hasadutta Maharaj in his bedroom this morning. So that went on for a couple of days. Then on September the 17th, Prabhupada told Hasadutta that this morning's recording session would be the last. He wants to oblige Hasadutta, but he said that the singing is too much strain because of his high blood pressure. So he made those. I don't know what happened to those recordings. Hasadutta kept them for himself, and I have no idea whether he ever produced them or sent. I don't think he sent them to the archives either. So, August the 3rd, 1976, this was another occasion Prabhupada heard one of his own tapes playing. This was in New Mayapur. Anybody was there at that time when Prabhupada was in New Mayapur, 76, when they installed Krishna and Balaram? None of you went there, huh? Anyway, it was nice. I mean, Prabhupada had been here. He had been very, very sick when he first arrived from New York, and the first 2 or 3 days he was in bed practically the whole time. Then he gradually improved. So when we flew to France, the weather was better there, it was hotter, and we went to New Mayapur, and Prabhupada started to walk a little bit again. He had not been taking his morning walks. So what he did was, instead of taking a morning walk, he started taking an afternoon walk. And he would walk around the grounds, and then there was some grassy area, and he would sit down, all the devotees would sit around, and then he would talk a little bit from the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada has made his evening walk a regular event. At about 6 p.m. he went downstairs. More and more devotees are arriving from all the temples across Europe, and a large crowd sat waiting with great anticipation, stood waiting with great anticipation to join him at the main entrance. As Prabhupada walked with his entourage through the garden, loudspeakers in the near vicinity were broadcasting one of his bhajans from a central system in the chateau. So during the daytime they set up some speakers in the gardens, so anybody that was working in the fields, they could hear Prabhupada's bhajans playing all day, so it was very nice. So as he prepared to sit down on the broad grass verge, a devotee commented how beautiful Prabhupada's singing was on the tape. Prabhupada listened for a moment to himself singing and playing the harmonium. Then he smiled and said objectively, Narottam Das has said that this voice does not belong to this universe. So all the devotees cheered. Haribol. Prabhupada added, that is the secret. It is imported from the spiritual world. Golokara Premadana Harinama Sankirtana. Golokara, it is coming from Goloka Vrindavan. So I think that Prabhupada was referring to the kirtan, you know, the sound of kirtan, but everybody, you know, we all took it that it was Prabhupada's voice was also coming from the spiritual world. And Prabhupada didn't deny it either. So that was a nice. Other times when we had, you know, kirtans, of course whenever Prabhupada travelled around, everywhere he went, it was like a festival every day. You know, because as soon as Prabhupada arrived anywhere, there'd always be a big kirtan party to greet him, and that was a regular feature. Nowadays it doesn't happen, but with Prabhupada, wherever he went, you know, he'd arrive in an airport, there'd be some huge kirtan party there, and of course there was very little security there as well, so very often the devotees could come right up to the gate and greet Prabhupada right off the aeroplane. So there were a few memorable arrivals at different temples. One was on January the 17th, 1976. Prabhupada had been in Calcutta for a few days, and then we drove out to Mayapur. So there was a large gathering of ISKCON Mayapur devotees led by Bhavananda and Sudama Maharajas, and they were eagerly awaiting to greet Prabhupada when we arrived at about 11 a.m. As we approached, we saw that the construction of the beautiful and impressive gatehouse had been completed at the entrance to our property. The gatehouse is 15 feet thick with 3 archways. The center archway is wide enough and high enough for a truck to pass under, while the other 2 sides are for pedestrians. Above the archways sit 5 domes, the large central one capped with an ornate brass spire reaching some 50 feet or so up into the air. There are several small rooms in the domes on either side, and the entire structure is attractively painted. The domes in saffron and maroon, with yellow on the facing wall. Large footprints of Lord Chaitanya, adorned with a tulsi leaf sprig and surrounded by lotus flowers, are emblazoned on the front with the words Sri Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir below them. So Prabhupada got out of the car on the main front road. As everyone looked on in great delight, he stepped forward and he cut a large ribbon, officially opening the gateway, so they had an official ceremony. The formal ceremony over, the metal gates were opened, and he happily walked through the arch and entered the temple compound, followed by a stream of devotees. He moved steadily along the road, past the original thatched hut where he had first stayed when he first got the land, and past flower beds and crops towards the main building. All the while, he was surrounded by a dancing, chanting party of about 20 or 30 young Bengali brahmacharis, all Vaishnavas, with their heads shaven and decorated with tilak, loudly chanting Hare Krishna. These are all the privileged residents of Lord Chaitanya's holy Dham, whose greatest joy in life is clearly the presence of the Lord's pure devotee. Entering the ground floor temple room, Prabhupada greeted the beautiful brass forms as Sri Sri Radha Madhav. Sri Shalagram Shila is also present, Mayapur being one of the few ISKCON temples in which Prabhupada has so far sanctioned his worship. After a lively Guru Puja, Prabhupada gave a short talk describing the benefits of life in the holy Dham. It was Bhaktivedanta Thakur's aspiration, he said, that the Europeans, Americans and Indians all together dance jubilantly and chant Gaura Hari. So this temple, Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, is meant for transcendental United Nations. What the United Nations has failed, that will be achieved here under the process recommended by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prithivichay Chaijata Nagaradi Gram Sabrachar Prachar Hoy Morna. So you have all come from all parts of the world and are living together in this temple. So you train these small boys. I'm very glad especially to see the small children from all other countries, and Indian and Bengalis, all together forgetting their bodily consciousness. That is the greatest achievement of this movement, that everyone forgets the bodily conception of life. Nobody thinks here of themselves as European, American, Indian, Hindu, Muslim or Christian. They forget all these designations and simply they are ecstatic in chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. So kindly, what you have begun, do not break it. Continue it very jubilantly. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the master of Mayapur, he will be very much pleased upon it. And ultimately, you will go back home, back to Godhead. Thank you very much. So that was a nice greeting in Mayapur. The next really nice one was when we arrived in Melbourne on April the 19th. It was the beginning of Prabhupada's last world tour. We had left Bombay on the 18th of April, and we actually ended up travelling for about 22 hours. We had flown to Singapore. Then in Singapore there was supposed to be a 3-hour stopover, and that later turned into 7 hours. because there was some problem with the aeroplane. So in the meantime, of course, in those days, the Singapore airport was a really horrible little ex-military airbase that they had converted, you know, for the tourists. Changi Airport was not built at that time. And when we arrived there, of course, Prabhupada used to travel on first class. Prabhupada and the servant, they would travel first class, and anybody else on the party, they would be in economy. So when we arrived, there was Prabhupada, myself, and Pushta Krishna. And we had a 3-hour stopover, so we wanted to go into the VIP lounge, because we had first class tickets. But the way the airport was structured, you actually had to go past immigration to get into the first class lounge, even though it was still in the airport. It was like a really weird setup. And as soon as they saw that we were Hare Krishnas, they wouldn't let us in. So, you know, we were just standing. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to sit down, and we had 3 hours to wait. So Pushta Krishna spent about 10 minutes arguing with the immigration officials that we have first-class tickets, we're entitled to use the the first-class lounge. And we're not going anywhere. We've got an onward flight in 3 hours. You know, so after about 10 minutes, finally they agreed, all right, you can go. So they stamped us in, we officially entered. And then we went into the airport to find the lounge, and it was a pub. This was a first-class lounge. Fortunately, it was closed when we first got there, so they opened it up, they let us in. We sat down, we had some prasadam that we brought with us in the tiffin box, and Prabhupada took his meal. And then after about 45 minutes, we start seeing all these people coming in, and they're smoking, and then the bar opens, and they're all sitting around drinking. So we had to get up and leave. And all they had was, you know, these old molded plastic bucket seats that they used to have, really uncomfortable. That was it. We had to sit there for about 4 hours. And then when we finally got on the aeroplane, again we sat for another 3 hours because there was some technical problem and they were trying to fix it. So it was quite a long and, you know, arduous trip. Then we had an overnight flight to Sydney, and then from Sydney we had an hour in stopover, and then we flew down to Melbourne. So by the time we got down to Melbourne, it was 22 hours of, you know, traveling time. And of course, when Prabhupada arrived there, then there was a big kirtan party. So 11 a.m. and we arrived in Melbourne we left Sydney at 11 a.m. and arrived in Melbourne just after noon. Before landing, we filled out the customary landing cards, which also required a list of baggage. So this was myself and Pushta Krishna's first international travel with Srila Prabhupada. So without thinking carefully, I filled out Prabhupada's card, indicating that he had one suitcase. Then once off the plane, we passed through the immigration without difficulty and entered the baggage hall. We decided that Prabhupada and I should go directly through the customs, carrying only his red attaché case, and Pushta Krishna Swami would bring the suitcases. However, the customs officer insisted that Prabhupada had to wait for the suitcase that was indicated on his landing form. So I pleaded strongly with the man that he should please allow Prabhupada to go through, because I had packed his suitcase and I would take full responsibility for it. I pointed out that there were no chairs for Srila Prabhupada to sit down on, and that it would take at least another half hour for the bags to come off the plane. I said that Prabhupada was over 80 years old, he had been travelling for so many hours, and it was unnecessary to make him wait. And I had packed his bags for him anyway, so I would show them. Despite my best attempts, the customs official was utterly uncooperative, and he refused to allow Prabhupada to go through. Anybody who's ever been to Australia, you'll know they're the most officious and bureaucratic people in the world, even worse than the British. Yes, they are. They're real sticklers for the rules and regulations, and especially customs. They're paranoid about anything coming in, you know, seeds and fruits and this and that. So he just wouldn't let us in. So the discussion became heated as my temper arose. A small crowd of passengers gathered around us to see what the disturbance was. Prabhupada just walked away and stood quietly to one side. So I was getting into it with this customs man, and I was getting really angry. And I was, you know, raising my voice, and he was being very obdurate. Prabhupada just walked off to the side as, you know, I'm not with him. But he didn't tell me to stop either. So he just stood quietly to the side. The official was obdurate. He returned to his post, leaving me standing there fuming. 2 minutes later, an airport policeman approached me to ask what was going on. I wasn't sure, you know, what is he coming over for? Is he going to get on my case? So I explained that we simply wanted Prabhupada to be allowed to go straight through into the arrival hall, and we would bring the bags. He asked me, is all that going on because of him? So that was the loud roar of a tremendous Harinam Kirtan that was coming through the doors leading into the arrival hall. The kirtan could be clearly heard above all the airport noise and the public address announcements. Guru Kripa Swami and a large number of devotees were excitedly banging kartals, beating mridangas, and chanting so loudly that the airport officials had moved them away from the main greeting area. Still, the sound was drowning out everything else. With every opening and closing of the doors, the intense chanting boomed louder and then receded. The sounds of the holy names uplifted us, and when Prabhupada heard it, he inquired innocently, "This is our men?" As if, you know, it could be anybody else. The airport security personnel was somewhat bewildered as to how to handle the situation. "Will it stop if he goes through?" the policeman asked. I assured him, yes, they will. So within seconds, Prabhupada was allowed to pass through, and Pushta Krishna and myself waited for the bags. As Prabhupada disappeared through the doors and was spotted by the devotees, the kirtan reached a terrific crescendo with loud shouts of Jai Prabhupada. Then the noise stopped abruptly, and Prabhupada was taken into the VIP lounge where the devotees had arranged a press conference. So it was a nice greeting. After travelling for so long, then we heard this big kirtan going on, so it immediately, you know, we felt uplifted. And of course, as soon as Prabhupada came out the doors, it got even louder, and then it stopped. In the meantime, there was a little incident that happened after Prabhupada went out. I had his bag, and so I was a bit apprehensive. Now, you know, I finally got the bag off the carousel, and I had to go through the customs. And I thought, now if I get the same guy, he's really going to harass me. But instead, they directed me to another guy, and he had seen what had been going on, so he went out of his way to be nice. So he said, you know, just put it on the counter here, just open it up a second, I just have a quick look inside, don't worry, everything will be fine. So then we unzipped Prabhupada's suitcase, he lifted up the lid, and a cockroach about this big leapt out of the suitcase. So it had, you know, decided, you know, it wanted to come on tour. It was, you know, probably jumped in there when we were in Bombay, you know, in the night time. And Prabhupada's winter coat was on the top, so I think it had been hiding in the winter coat. So as soon as the lid opened, boom, up he came. As soon as it jumped out, this customs officer, he'd yell out, "Quarantine! Quarantine!" like this. And he hit this big red buzzer that was on a post next to his counter. And this light started flashing and the klaxon went off. I mean, it was like pandemonium. And I was thinking, oh my God, now I'm going to be here for hours, you know. So anyway, the guy, you know, as he's doing all this, he smiles at me, he says, "Don't worry, just take a minute." And then a guy comes running out and he had 2 big cans of bug spray, I mean, you know, the big ones. So the customs officer, he got 1 in each hand, and he and he let both cans into Prabhupada's suitcase. And then he shut the lid, he zipped it up, he said, "Have a good stay in Melbourne." And then I was through. It was quite funny.
What happened to the cockroach?
Oh, the cockroach was running around on the counter. The guy either took his shoe off or he got something and bang! Flattened it right on the counter. That was the end. He was an illegal immigrant. So that was the arrival in Melbourne. When we left, then again, as Prabhupada had arrived, the devotees gave him a rousing send-off, chanting and dancing all around him right up to the plane door. As he went down the escalator, the devotees kept abreast by running down the up escalator. Right, Prabhupada was going down, so to keep up with him, they were running down the one coming up. And Prabhupada grinned to see their enthusiasm. At the plane, he turned and waved to them all as he entered, flashing a brilliant smile to show his appreciation and causing them to jump and shout with happiness. So then from there we flew to Auckland. That was on the 26th. And with the 3-hour time difference and 3 hours travel, it was 10 p.m. when our Air New Zealand flight touched down in Auckland. There at the airport to greet Srila Prabhupada were 50 or 60 jubilantly chanting devotees with drums, karatals and guitars. It was quite a heterogeneous crowd, most of them from Tusta Krishna Swami's group. The local ISKCON temple only has about 12 men and women. So on the way to the temple, cars and vans packed with excited devotees were speeding ahead of Prabhupada's car, and as they passed, they were waving and smiling, shouting, "Jai Prabhupada!" So, that was nice. But, you know, it was not exactly our ISKCON crew. It was Tusta Krishna's crew, and they were all into guitars and stuff like that. But Prabhupada liked it, and they were chanting, and he encouraged them. So we only stayed there a day and a half, and then we left for Fiji on April the 28th. So there was a big send-off at the airport. As we waited for our flight, Prabhupada sat serenely and stately as the entire assembly of devotees settled in a large semicircle on the floor in front of him. An atmosphere of blissful tranquility seemed to envelop the gathering as everybody took a last darshan of His Divine Grace. Hari Ramadas, who was a former rock group member who is now with Tusta Krishna, began to play his guitar and chant Hare Krishna to a gentle, lilting melody. Guru Kripa Swami began to play the karatals as an accompaniment, but Prabhupada stopped him, allowing the boy to sing solo for a few minutes as he listened with obvious pleasure. Smiling broadly, Prabhupada gave him his garland. So in this way he encouraged Tusta Krishna's men to continue with their chanting, knowing that as long as they did this, even if they never agree to cooperate with ISKCON, they will continue to be purified and make spiritual advancement. He is their spiritual master, and he wants to keep them somehow connected. When the time came to depart,